Welcome back to the stories that Jesus loved to tell. I'm Tom R., pastor of the Village Church. I'm glad you're here. The parable we're considering for this session is found in Luke 14, 16 through 24. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video now so that you can read that. If you're in a group, read it aloud together, and when you finish, come back and we'll start our conversation. Jesus said someone gave a great banquet. But by the time the dinner was served, the host looked around and nothing had gone as he had planned. Some would even argue it was no longer a great banquet. To understand this story, we need to know a little bit about dining etiquette in the ancient Middle East. And we need to remember this, that when Jesus talks about eating, he is really talking about the kingdom of God. You see, whenever it's time for dinner with Jesus, we get a glimpse of the kingdom, whether he's feeding 5,000 in the midst of the desert or feeding 12 in an upper room. When we're at the table and Jesus is at the table, it's about the kingdom. You see, when we sit down to eat with someone else, eating really becomes a secondary thing. When we sit down to eat with someone else, it's not primarily about getting our nutrition for the day. It's about relationships. That's what happens when we gather at the table. Now, I said to understand this story, we need to know a couple of things. We need to know that eating is about relationships, and we need to know something of the Middle East dining etiquette. I learned etiquette at the table when I was a kid. My mother was constantly telling us where our elbows weren't supposed to be. I learned that you could talk and you could chew your food, but you didn't do it at the same time. That wasn't proper etiquette. I learned there are certain things that were table conversations and certain things that were not. If you found a dead frog on the way home from school, you could tell your mother, but not at the table. That wasn't dinner conversation. It was table etiquette. If you're eating by yourself, you can throw all that out the window if you want. You can eat in your bathrobe, watch Jeopardy, and drink milk straight from the carton, I suppose. But when two or more are gathered, how we are with one another, it matters. It's been that way a long time. There were rules in the ancient world as well. As scholar Ken Bailey describes it, a host who would throw a dinner would send out two invitations. The first would go with the request for an RSVP. Once the host knows how many will be in attendance at his or her dinner, then the host knows what to prepare. If it's a small group, there'll be a few fish perhaps. A medium-sized group, maybe they'll prepare lamb. If it's a large group, the fatted calf. Once the meal is prepared, then a second invitation or announcement goes to inform the guests, dinner is ready, come, the feast is prepared. It's at this moment that our parable happens. The host sends the announcement, dinner is ready, and then from those who had RSVP'd and said that they would attend, he receives excuses. I'm sorry I bought land, I've got to inspect it, I apologize. Another, I bought 5 yoke of oxen. I've got to go test them. And still a third, I've gotten married. I wish I could be there, but we're on our honeymoon. I'm sorry I can't attend. Now, if you say you're going to attend and then you don't attend, well, you hope your excuses are good ones. So what do you think about these? Are these legitimate excuses or not? Scholars don't agree. Some scholars say these are the best excuses. They'll point us to Deuteronomy, where Deuteronomy gives us 3 reasons that one can be excused from participating in war. One is if you built a house, you haven't lived in it yet, or if you've planted a vineyard and have not tasted its fruit, or if you've married without consummation. Now, if these are the excuses that can excuse you from war, they're certainly legitimate for missing a dinner party. As one student of the text says, these are not normal, casual excuses of computer calendars gone wrong or faulty alarm clocks or traffic jams. These excuses are legitimate. But others say, not so fast. Read these excuses carefully. I can't make your birthday party because I bought a house and I want to go over and inspect it. No one buys property without inspecting it first. You don't say, well, I bought a house, I'm heading over there to find out whether it has 1 or 2 bathrooms. No, you do that in advance. The same with oxen, 5 yoke of oxen. That's a pretty significant investment. Nobody would do that without testing them first. You never heard anybody say, I just bought a new car, I'm going to go find out what kind it is and give it a test drive. No, you do that first. And a wedding? Weddings were planned months in advance. You knew the date of the wedding when you RSVP'd. Some say these aren't legitimate excuses. These are so flimsy, they're insults. Now, I don't know. Maybe you can read it either way. The truth is, both make sense in our spiritual journey. Sometimes the call of God comes to us and the response we offer are such flimsy, adolescent, self-centered excuses, they must fall on God's ears as insults. And other times, the call of God comes to us and invites us to reflect on things we think are most important in our lives and to rethink them, to reprioritize them. Maybe these excuses are legitimate, maybe they aren't. But they do reveal why these people were the ones invited to the great dinner. See, these excuses reveal that the host is following all of the rules of ancient protocol. You see, in that day, if you invited someone to a great dinner, you made sure you invited people who could invite you to a great dinner. It's an ethic of reciprocity. We still do that. If you invited my mother to dinner, before dessert was over, she would say, now we've been talking for a long time, I want to have you over to our house, so I'll call you first of the week and we'll get a date where you can come to our house for dinner. She learned that from her mother. We still do it today. If you go to lunch and your buddy says, I'll pick up the check, well, you can do that sometime. Next time it's on you. If your buddy picks it up all the time, well, you're not going to go to lunch very often. It's an ethic of reciprocity. That's the way it was in the ancient world. You invited those to dinner who came to dinner, who could invite you to dinner. It was an ethic of reciprocity. It's just the way things were done. So a stunning moment happens in this story. Our host has a conversion right before our eyes. He sets all of that protocol aside. And he tells all of the guests, those who are of means, those who can afford oxen and fields, and if you've had a wedding lately, you know that can set you back. He sets all of those people aside and said, if you can't come to my dinner, I'll invite those who have no status, who can improve my status, those who can show no reciprocity. And this dinner party takes on a whole new protocol. It's governed by the etiquette of a different kingdom. Rather than feed the overfed because they can reciprocate, this host invites those who cannot. This host does something not because it will benefit him, but because it will benefit them. This host intended to throw a party for himself, really. But he is transformed and ends up hosting a dinner for the guest. Go out and bring in the lame and the blind and the poor. There's no reciprocity. It's just grace. What's something you've done lately simply because it was gracious? Not because it made you look good to your neighbors, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Not because it made you feel good, but simply because it's what the world needed from you. You know, sometimes we in the church, we get that backwards. We engage in mission because it fulfills us. We engage in mission because it makes us come alive. And that's not bad, but it shouldn't be primary. Our purpose in mission should always preference those who are in need. Frederick Buechner described calling, or our vocation, this way. He says, it's where the world's greatest need and our greatest joy intersect. And I think that's true sometimes. I don't know that it works that way all the time. Sometimes the world just needs us, and we have to respond whether it gives us joy or not. We serve not because there's reciprocity there, but simply because it's what God calls us to do. But even then, Buechner's not wrong. If we do what is right simply because it's right, could there be any greater joy? If we are obedient to God's call in our lives simply because it's God's call in our lives, could there be any greater purpose? You know, I can't help but imagine our host looking around at that table cluttered with the blind and the lame and the poor and the outcast, all feasting at his table. Some would say it's not a great dinner because nobody's status is improved here. But our host had a conversion. It's not about status. It's not about reciprocity. It's about being brothers and sisters. And it's grace that makes brothers and sisters of all of us. You know, our host is probably thinking, how could I have imagined this any other way? Who would want this dinner any other way?